Hi, this is Eugenia Mitchell, host of At Home with the Mitchells. Thanks for listening to the following podcast on Public House Media.
Hello, and welcome to Level 6 of Jumanji. Kidding, kind of. Welcome, and thank you for joining the Confessions of a Military Spouse podcast during this crazy time. I am your host, Jenna. I'm a military spouse of 10 years, a mom, and a registered and certified dental assistant. Again, I just want to say thank you for being here with me today. And if you find that anything in today's episode resonates with you, or if you know of someone who might be interested in hearing today's episode, please share it. As always, I appreciate any and all feedback. So if you would like to leave some feedback, please feel free to email me at confessionsofamilspouse@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook at Confessions of a Military Spouse, Instagram at Confessions of a Mil Spouse, or at publichousemedia.org. First and foremost, I understand that there is a lot happening in this world currently, and I, like everyone else, definitely have an opinion on the matter. However, I don't feel like this is the time or the place to voice that opinion. So what I will say is that we are stronger together, and our nation needs us to come together now more than ever, and I pray for peace and justice for everyone. Now, let's get back to the topic of today's discussion, as hard as it may be. I talk a lot about the ups and downs, basically, of being a military spouse, but I haven't really dug too deeply into the loneliness and the pressure that comes with being a military spouse. So that's what I want to do today. So let's go ahead and dig in. So I know I've said a few times how it seems so lonely as a military spouse, but I've never really elaborated on it. And I'm also not sure, quote unquote, outsiders understand the pressure of being a military spouse either. Now, I'm sure there are some non-military spouses that can probably relate on some level to some of what I'm about to talk about. And when I think about that, I specifically think about law enforcement spouses, firefighter spouses, EMT spouses, nurse spouses, things like that. But I'm sure there are other spouses that I haven't mentioned that will probably be able to relate to. But first, let's talk about the loneliness that can come with being a military spouse. I feel like when military spouses mention loneliness, the first thing that comes to people's mind is deployment, which, yes, that's an obvious, but what I want to talk about first is the other times of loneliness as a military spouse. And I want you to know this is not a cry for help or anything of that nature, but just exposing the truth about being a military spouse and the things that we can oftentimes feel that we tend to keep to ourselves because we don't want to be viewed as weak or complaining, or we don't want to be a quote unquote Karen. So first things first, the everyday loneliness. And yes, I said every day. But I don't mean like every single day, although I guess it could be, but I more so mean like the day-to-day, everyday life loneliness that can happen. I know with my husband, his schedule is pretty regular right now, knock on wood, but every now and then there's those like few days in a row that he'll have to work late, and then that leaves me, rushing around to get our daughter picked up from daycare, get supper made, homework done if she needs to, get the dog and the cat fed, make sure her shower is, taken, and, she's got her bedtime routine done. And there's just a lot of things that need to be done between the time work ends and bedtime. And if you're doing those things by yourself, even if it's just for a few days in a row, it can become tedious and also lonely. It's always nice to have a helping hand around the house, even if it's just to do the dishes after you make supper. But when that's not available, for 2 to 3 days in a row, you realize how, I guess, quote unquote, lonely that makes you feel. But you're also so busy that sometimes you really don't even have time to think about it. But then again, sometimes you do have that time to think about it right then and there. And to be honest, it sucks. And as a military spouse, I would say 85 to 95% of the time, you feel like you're taking a back seat to the military. That may be, let's say, branch dependent, but still. Now, I know what's coming. Well, you knew what you were getting into and you married them and you knew what you signed up for and blah, blah, blah. And that's just bullshit. Straight bullshit. No one ever knows the truth of what they're getting into until they're already into it. Plain and simple. Then when military spouses have this revelation of just how shitty life can be, are we supposed to leave? I mean, for some people, yeah, that really does happen. But for others, no. We don't leave. We find different ways to cope and manage the hand that we've been dealt. And if we're being honest, our spouses don't even have control or know what they're getting into until they go into the military. I can assure you that that is the true, honest facts, because my husband was a recruiter for 3 years. And I know all of the things that the poolies are told. They're told they can do anything they want. And then when they actually enlist and ship, there's only certain positions available. And they basically get what they get and are not supposed to throw a fit. It's sad, but it's definitely true. So we have now talked about, the day-to-day, everyday loneliness that can occur. But what I want to talk about next is when they have to go away for training for weeks or months or however long at a time. And I'm not even talking deployment yet. So not only do you have the everyday loneliness, but you have this multiplied by weeks at a time. And let's say you've just moved to a new duty station and then boom, they have to go away for training. You're now in a brand new, quote unquote, foreign place. You probably don't have that group of friends yet or a person to count on if you would need them. You're like searching the wives page at this point for anybody's number that you can put down for an emergency contact. Yeah, truth. Not that I've done that before or anything. But you don't have anybody. Everything is still basically new to you. You're still using GPS to get around because you don't know the area and still trying to live your day-to-day life without your significant other. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And there's no other way to put it than hard and challenging. Is it doable? Well, absolutely. But it doesn't make it any harder or any less lonely. Yes. I understand we are in the 21st century, and to be honest, we're very fortunate with technology, but that doesn't replace how it feels to physically be in front of someone and have that face-to-face conversation. Even if right now you have to do it with a mask on, it's just still not the same. Plus, all of that responsibility now falls on you, which we will discuss in a minute. So the loneliness is definitely a real thing, whether it's days or weeks, and then there's deployments which are months. I said earlier that when I talk about loneliness as a military spouse, most people would probably associate that with deployments, and that's definitely true because that's one of the first things that comes to my mind. Deployments are very lonely, and not just because they're physically gone, but because of all of the things I mentioned above. There's no one there to help with the day-to-day tasks. When you sit down for supper, you don't necessarily get to have an adult conversation. You probably have your kid or kids screaming, mom, 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 mommy, mom, mom, because we all know that's true. And then you have to clean up after yourself. But if you have those kids, you probably have to clean up after them too. And then everything else that just goes along with day-to-day life. And you have to do that day after day after day. It's very tiresome, it's very cumbersome, and it's very lonely at times. But because I try to find the silver lining, sometimes it's not so bad because after your kid or kids go to bed, you don't have to share the TV with anybody. You don't have to share Netflix with anybody, and you can watch whatever the hell you want. Which is how I was able to binge watch a lot of my shows like Dead to Me and Working Moms. And you. Anyway, I know that I talk a lot about spouses and the loneliness we feel, but the kids feel it too. You know, of course they have us that are still there with them all the time, but it's definitely not the same. You know, I know the bond that my husband and my daughter have is way different than the bond that my daughter and I have. When both parents are at home too, it also just breaks up the monotony of everyday activities or duties, you know, or whatever the situation is. Because I know when my husband was last deployed, my daughter and I had a very, very structured schedule that we pretty much stuck to. And I'm sure that my daughter probably got tired of it because it mostly consisted of the same routine every single day, but that's how we survived. Now, we've talked about the loneliness a little bit, and now I want to shift gears and talk about the pressures of being a military spouse. And you might be thinking like, crazy lady, what are you talking about? Pressures of being a military spouse? ? Well, that's what I want to talk about. While it may seem like there isn't much pressure to go along with a military spouse, I'm here to tell you that there really is. There is a lot more pressure than most people realize. A lot more pressure than even I realized, to be honest. Currently, I think of all of the pressure from being a military spouse and a mom, but I want to back up a bit and talk about the pressures of being a military spouse, even when you don't have kids. First of all, society as a whole pretty much expects military spouses to be a certain way and basically stereotypes them. And yes, unfortunately, it's true. I know it's probably hard for a lot of people to understand, but military spouses have a very, very, very high stereotype. Anyway, so for me, I knew immediately I did not want to be that typical military spouse stereotype. So I have worked super hard over the last 10 years to make sure that I don't fit in that mold. Don't get me wrong. I obviously love being a military spouse, but I don't love the idea of being called a dependa, and I don't love the idea of having this stereotype about me. And so, you know, I work full time, and thankfully, I guess, that kind of knocks me out of that stereotype pretty quickly. But that's not the only reason that I work. Like, I work because I like to work. I work because I love what I do, and I live to help people. And that's why I work. But it's definitely an added bonus that it doesn't put me in that typical military spouse stereotype. So for me, there's the pressure to not be that stereotype and to break that mold and show people that the military spouse stereotypes are so uncalled for and so not true and not even necessary. Then there's the pressure of, quote unquote, knowing it all. Sorry. So then there is the pressure of, quote unquote, knowing it all. I feel like as a military spouse, society kind of dubs us as knowing it all, and that is just absolutely not true. There is so much I do not know about the military world, but also so much I don't want to know. I specifically don't get super involved because a lot of times I just don't want to know it. And it's not because I don't care, but because it's usually not super pertinent information that I need to know. And I need that brain space for other information. Like all the cool stuff that's going on with NASA right now. But anyway, but it's also the same with my husband. You know, I could tell him 10 different times how to place an implant on a patient, and he would only retain so much of it. And funny enough, I actually had a quick chat with a dual military family, and she said that even though she and her spouse are both in the military, they're basically in two completely different worlds and don't know everything about the other's job. And I feel like that scenario is so common everywhere in the world with dual working couples that they don't truly know everything about the other's job. But yet, for some reason, as a military spouse, people just automatically assume and think that we should know everything, and we don't. And unfortunately, we won't. Also, along those lines, come all of the questions like, where is he deploying to? When will he be back? Are you guys moving? When are you guys moving? Where are you guys moving? What do you mean you don't have a say in any of this? Ooh, the list seriously goes on and on and on. And I'm here to tell you that we as military spouses have no clue half the time the answers to your questions, because our spouses half the time don't know the answers to the questions. But I do find it funny that people assume we should just because we're military spouses. And to be honest, I mean, I do the same with other people. So, and you know, their jobs and things like that. So I can't really blame them or fault them. Now, let's talk about the pressure of being a military spouse and a parent. Whew, talk about the perfect storm. There is a lot of pressure to uphold yourself in general as a military spouse and be a good person, because you're a quote unquote direct reflection of your spouse. Oh, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. But holy crap, the pressure of being a military spouse and a parent. Going back to talking about trainings and deployment, I think is where this probably hits most, because as a military spouse, we're supposed to keep up with all of the ever-changing things happening during our spouse's deployment, especially during homecoming time. I mean, there can be emails within minutes of each other with changing information when it's homecoming time. It's insane. And then throw parenting on top of that. Oh, Lord. We, as a parent and military spouse during deployment, are the sole provider for our kids. They're literally depending on us for everything. They depend on us to get them to and from school and sports and extracurricular activities. And then they depend on us to make sure they're fed, they have clothes, their permission slip gets turned in. We have to make sure their homework is done. They get to the doctor and the dentist and everything else. And if you're like me, you're working as well. So making sure that all of that stuff is done and when it's supposed to be done, you guys, is some freaking crazy pressure. And let me just tell you, I definitely felt it the last time my husband was deployed. And plus, now we have this world of social media, which is both a blessing and a curse, because everyone is posting these cute first and last day of school photos with these elaborate shirts and, you know, these elaborate birthday cakes and birthday gifts that they're taking, you know, their kids are taking to school for them to hand out and so many other things. And I'm just over here like, yo, my kid got to school on time for her first day, so that's good, right? Not to mention, you know, if they have donuts with dad or a Father's Day thing at school or daddy and me something or another, you know, you generally have to be the dad too. And that's some really big shoes to fill, but also some really serious pressure because they're already missing, you know, their other parent, and now they're expecting you to fill that role on top of everything else. And it's a lot. And, you know, I've said before, I'm sure there are spouses out there of other occupations that can probably relate to this as well. And I'm sure there's so many things that I'm missing when it comes to, you know, talking about loneliness and the pressure of being a military spouse. But this definitely at least scratches the surface of what we as military spouses experience quite often when it comes to loneliness and the pressure of being a military spouse. Thank you so much for being here with me today amidst all of the craziness happening in the world right now. Do not forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform so you never miss an episode.